days after the Lee family had settled into their new abode, nestled amongst the pines, they are confronted with paranormal happenings. Initially, the disturbances seem harmless, as the couple's two young sons began to voice concerns about peculiar lights flickering in their rooms and eerie shadows dancing across the walls. But the situation takes an ominous turn when Steve and Beth themselves bear witness to disturbing and terrifying events. This is the untold story of the haunted house of the Black Forest in Colorado. There's an undeniable, almost supernatural call to the eerie and the unexplained that seems to emanate from the depths of dense woodlands. The Black Forest, a vast expanse of towering trees and shadowy undergrowth, has been a breeding ground for creepy tales of the otherworldly. Amidst this foreboding landscape lies a dilapidated house, its weathered walls and creaking floorboards harboring secrets that have captured the imagination of paranormal enthusiasts across the nation. This isolated dwelling, nestled deep within the Colorado wilderness, has earned a reputation as one of the most haunted sites in the United States. Its very existence a testament to the enduring power of mystery and the unknown. The region referred to as the Black Forest is an unincorporated area situated in El Paso County, Colorado, nestled near the city of Colorado Springs. This area was traditionally known as the Pineries, a vast expanse spanning over 1,000 miles. Aptly named for the dense concentration of majestic ponderosa pine trees that blanketed the landscape. The Black Forest's remote and secluded nature, coupled with its towering evergreens and rugged wilderness, has long captivated those seeking solitude and a connection with the untamed beauty of nature. The secluded log cabin, nestled deep within the Black Forest region of Colorado, seemed like a tranquil oasis for the Lee family when they first laid eyes on it in 1991. Stephen and Beth, along with their two sons, had relocated from Louisiana, seeking a serene escape amidst the towering pines and pristine wilderness. The sparsely populated area, known for its slow-paced lifestyle, crisp air, and breathtaking vistas, promised a dream home surrounded by untouched nature. Little did they know that this idyllic retreat would soon become a source of inexplicable occurrences and unsettling experiences that would forever alter their perception of the supernatural. About the Lees. Stephen Lee, a father, husband, and truck driver, had done well for his family. And wanting a change of scenery, they found what they believed to be their dream home. A 6,000 square foot, 3-story cabin located within the Black Forest. Situated on 5 acres of land, Stephen and his wife Beth, with every step as they surveyed the property, could envision their 2 young sons playing and growing up there, their own little piece of the American dream. So, it took a little bit of time, but their offer on the home was ultimately accepted, and within the coming months, they would soon call this secluded place home. However, they would fail to realize that it wasn't just inhabited by the family of 4. The first week at their new residence seemed like something out of a fairy tale, Mom, Dad, and the kids were all comfortable and very happy after making the long trek from Louisiana to Colorado. And the family themselves seemed happy and content with their decision. However, this would change. The Lees' two young sons shared a room, as brothers often do at a young age. And roughly after their first week, they began to tell their parents that something strange was happening in their bedroom. Bright, colorful lights flashed about, and terrifying, shadowy specters flowed across their walls. These strange happenings frightened the boys and often kept them awake. So of course, they told their parents. However, often in these situations, they were dismissed. Beth and Steve simply believed that the boys had overactive imaginations and figured it would just take time for them to adjust to their new environment. But this too would change mere weeks later. Upon coming home from an evening of fun as a family, they would arrive to see their home lighting inside with strange, lightning-like flashes of light. They could see the spectacle from their driveway. In the words of Beth, "One day we came home and it was like the 4th of July in our living room and bedroom. We had all sorts of colorful flashes of light seemingly everywhere. We rushed inside to figure out just what these things were, and simultaneously, it sounded like people were stomping across our roof. Then all of a sudden, it stopped." Never having seen anything like this before, the Lees were simply perplexed, and not sure of what to make of this activity. They would lay their heads down to sleep this night, but what they failed to realize is that this was just a prelude of what was to come. In the coming months, the activity grew in intensity. What started as phantom lights and flickering shadows had escalated into something taking place almost every single day. From disembodied banging sounds to whispers, the sound of chains dragging on the floor or even inside the walls, to pushing, assaulting, and disturbing the family. Sadly, the Lees' young sons were more often than not the targets of this paranormal force that plagued them. Night after night, and almost every night, they were harassed by shadow people, the reappearance of the mysterious lights, and the awful banging sounds of something unseen. The family did their best to make the situation work. They, after all, were newly tied up financially in the purchase of what they believed was going to be their forever home. But it was something big or small nearly every day now that was taking place. During the day, appliances began to turn on and off on their own accord. This was attributed to an electrical issue at first, but after having the home examined by multiple electricians, they found no faulty wiring. Alongside electrical appliances, faucets began to turn on by themselves, often making a wet mess in whatever room they were activated in. During the night, the reemergence of the lights, the movement of the shadow people, and the sounds truly haunted them. And these disturbing happenings were soon coupled by something new and equally terrible. A noxious, chemical odor began to appear in the home with no rational origin. The smell of these mystery chemicals burned the nose, eyes, and throats of everyone whenever it appeared. In the coming days, yet more professionals would be called out, and yet nothing, no origin of the chemicals, or detection of them either, could be found. It seemed that whatever force that dwelled within the walls of the cabin home in the woods had a particular hatred for the Lee family, and this force soon began to physically hit all of them, seemingly whenever it could, often leaving bruises. Not a believer in the paranormal, Steve Lee, having had professionals come out and not provide any rational answers to their strange ailments. This, coupled with the now daily torment that he and his family were enduring, had finally reached his wit's end. He wanted to prove that either there was someone or something messing with them, and over the coming year, he invested in a total of $70,000 worth of camera equipment and security equipment to monitor every square inch of their home and property. Now, you might think that that's an incredible amount of money to spend on cameras and alarm systems, and it is. But this was the 90s. The equipment wasn't as readily available or sophisticated as it is today, and it just goes to show that they were truly freaked out by whatever was taking place, that they wanted some kind of tangible proof that they could show the world so people didn't think that they were crazy. The cameras, which were mostly motion activated and would record when motion was detected, soon began to activate with no rational explanation and no physical means to be detected. After capturing several strange things on video and photograph, Steve decided to contact the local authorities for help. Records show that the El Paso police were contacted so often by the Lees in the months to come that they launched a formal investigation into just what was taking place at the cabin home in the Black Forest. During this time and the 2 years to follow, alongside the cameras, their security equipment, which could detect motion and forced entry, was triggered 62 times with no explanation as to what could be causing it. It wasn't faulty equipment or poor installation. It was oddly something else, something unexplainable. With not even the police able to rationalize what was happening to the Lees, Beth and Steve decided to take things one step further. They hired a private investigator. This was in part due to the police also growing tiresome of being contacted for assistance, and then there being nothing that they could do about it. Between the cameras and security equipment, and now hiring a private investigator, the Lees had all but spent the rest of their life savings. Most people, if it ever came to this, would simply try and cut their losses and sell the home. And we don't know if the Lees could have sold the home and moved elsewhere, but they truly still believed that this massive cabin home was their dream home, and they didn't want to give it up without a fight. Unfortunately, though, the private investigator was unable to help them. This left the Lees to simply tough out anything and everything that they had and were continuing to experience. After moving in 1991, the year now was 1995, and the activity had persisted despite the efforts of the Lee family to uncover just what was causing it. Steve, who still figured there had to be a rational explanation for what was taking place, had a little bit more of an open mind after a lengthy discussion with Beth. Seemingly having done everything else, the Lees concluded that they would try and contact paranormal investigators to see if they could do anything about the otherworldly happenings taking place in their home. After some research and calling numerous numbers, the Lees ended up getting in contact with the person who would end up being involved with the television show Sightings. Sightings was an American paranormal and news show that aired throughout the 1990s, covering various unexplained and fringe phenomena. As a result of this pretty lucky interaction, The show became very interested in producing an episode segment about hauntings surrounding the investigation of the Lee home. The show would contact a paranormal investigator and a self-proclaimed psychic in Minneapolis, Minnesota, named Echo Bodine. From her book, The Little Book of True Ghost Stories, Echo would explain her experience as the following. I got a call from the TV show Sightings, and they wanted to know if I would fly to Colorado Springs to help a family deal with some ghosts. The producers told me that the problem was the ghosts mostly seemed to come out at night, so I was asked to work from midnight until the early daybreak hours. It was a very hot day in mid-July when I arrived in Denver around 10 p.m. It was pretty eerie. There was intense lightning all throughout the sky and rain pouring down. I remember thinking how perfect the spooky weather was for investigating hauntings. Steve, the owner of the log home, was at the airport to pick me up. He was very open about not believing in ghosts. And as we drove through several towns in Colorado, I listened to him tell me story after story about some of the things that had gone on in their house. They heard voices, footsteps. Things would move from room to room. It took close to an hour to get up to their house in the mountains. And alongside the rain, a fog hung about 10 feet off the ground. When we arrived and I entered their 3-story log cabin home, from here I was greeted by a producer who asked me if I could take a seat while the scientist they had hired told us about his thermal camera. Having been tired from the trip, I laid my head back while the explanations were continuing, and suddenly I heard a voice come from behind me. It said, "Hey, come here." Upon turning around, I saw a large ghostly man. About 6 feet tall, the specter was wearing blue jeans and a blue checkered flannel shirt. I then heard in unison multiple voices tell me to look over here. And now there was 5 male spirits, all different, but dressed the same as the first. The original ghost said that his name was Tom, and that this was his house, and that no one was going to make him leave. He ran the show around here and had for a long time. I told the producer what was happening in case he wanted to capture anything for the segment, and he did. The conversation then ensued, with Tom explaining why he and the boys wanted to stay in the house, that it was his land, his home, and that he would not leave. One of the cameramen then asked if it was one of them who had been responsible for knocking over his very expensive camera off the countertop. All 5 in unison answered yes, and then disappeared out of sight. The scientist with the thermal camera did in fact capture a drop in temperature just right where Tom had stood. Around 2 a.m. in the morning, as me and Beth discussed the activity that she had experienced, the dogs the family owned would not stop barking outside. The producers, in an effort to keep their sounds from being picked up on the camera, tried to quiet them down, but simply weren't having any luck. Then, upon Beth showing me a photo of what they had captured on their own cameras, we suddenly were in the midst of 3 male spirits, one with a particularly angry scowl upon his face. One of them walked through both of us, causing us to jump out of our chairs, while the other, angry-looking spirit tried to take my breath away. I believe he did this to stoke fear from me in order to grow more powerful, and this worked because I felt as if I was being suffocated. By 3:30 a.m., we all decided to not focus on ghosts for a bit and to try and lighten the mood. We turned the cameras off and began eating some food in which Beth had prepared for us. But almost as soon as we began to relax, one of the camera women who had been sitting on the stairs began to hyperventilate. She then jumped up and screamed, "Get it out of me," as she fell down the stairs and onto the floor, writhing in pain. The producers asked for me to do something, so with the assistance of others, I helped her up and into a chair in the kitchen, and I began to burn sage, encircling her in the smoke. I asked her to say back to me that she was clear until she calmed down. It took about 20 minutes, but she eventually relaxed. She then was given a ride back to the hotel, and I never saw or heard from her again. By now it was 4:30 a.m., and we were waiting for the camera crew of the show to finish setting up their equipment in the bedrooms, where the majority of activity was seeming to take place. One of Steve's friends, who had been present most of the night, came up and handed me a brochure about the history of the local area. To my surprise, he told me that a man named Tom had been the sheriff here back in the 1800s. I felt shivers up my spine as I realized that this was the same Tom that now haunted the Lees' home. Roughly 5 a.m., as we set off to investigate the last bedroom, I walked into the room and saw there in the rocking chair in the corner who would turn out to be Beth's deceased grandmother. And on the opposite side of the room was Tom and the several male spirits under his control. We ended up burning sage and asking them all to move on to the other side. They all did leave the building, but I'm not convinced that they moved on. At about 6 a.m., we finally finished saging the entire house. Exhausted, we packed up our equipment and went back to our respective hotels. I've spoken to Steve and Beth since, and they informed me that activity at the cabin persisted shortly after our departure, and that although not fully convinced, Steve is convinced that there are things in this world that we will never truly understand. Sightings would do a follow-up episode segment years later with the Lees, where they brought in several spiritualists and an expert in hyperdimensional studies, and all would come to the conclusion that the home was indeed haunted. The expert would draw the conclusion that the home sat atop an interdimensional vortex, and coinciding with his conclusion, interestingly, a Hopi elder from the local area would also explain that the Black Forest sits on top what the Hopi call a rainbow vortex, a raging storm, a portal of sorts that contains great spiritual energy and the coming and going of many souls. Sometimes they burn out over time, and sometimes they don't. They are considered gateways between the world of the living and the spirit realm. Some strange and noteworthy things that took place during the second filming of the show's sightings at the Lees' residence was that a paranormal investigator had asked anyone if the name Howard bore any significance to them. The Lees were surprised because one of their best friends in Colorado Springs was a man named Howard. The entity then told the investigator, who relayed the information to everyone, that he was Howard's son, and that he in fact had not killed himself, but rather had been murdered. This disturbed the Lees a great deal because Howard's son had supposedly taken his own life by consuming deadly chemicals, working as a chemist. The stories and reputation of the home got such a local buzz from the press that even a Colorado senator by the name of Charles Duke visited the home with his own camera crew and would snap a few photographic pieces of evidence of apparitions to his and everyone else's surprise. Senator Duke was so convinced of the Lees' haunting that he even contacted the FBI to conduct a formal investigation, but the Bureau would rebuttal with, no federal laws had been broken. Years later, after everything had happened, Steve Lee, who still wasn't fully convinced of the supernatural, came to his own conclusions as to what was taking place. And for the record, it's a wild theory. He began to believe that the government was using his family and their remote location to test biological agents and psychological weapons of war. He claims he has even photographed military personnel on his property with firearms, and claims that they may have been shutting off the electricity in his home so they could enter undetected. These claims, although far-fetched, would be incredibly disturbing if true, and it would account for the noxious odors the family said they were experiencing, as well as the lights and some sounds. But oddly enough as well, the Air Force Base is located just a few minutes away from where the Lees live. The Lees, as far as we know, after placing the home for sale in 2010, no longer live there. The current residents are unknown, but it seems as if the property has changed hands multiple times. Whether it was ghosts, the result of what the Hopi call a rainbow vortex, or more sinisterly, the result of government military black ops. The haunting of Black Forest, Colorado is truly an intriguing tale. And if you find yourself seduced by what you could consider your dream home, take caution, because this calling might just be a siren sound. Don't let them take you. Thank you guys so much for watching this brand new episode. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, leave me a comment, subscribe with notifications on, and please share this around online or with a friend. All that stuff helps me out tremendously. Another thank you to today's sponsor, Keeps. Make sure to check my link down below. I love all of you guys, and thank you so much for everything. Until next time, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. There are certain realms of the paranormal and unexplained that seem to capture our imagination more than others, weaving themselves into legend and folklore, yet occasionally emerging as potential realities. One such entity that appears to dwell solely in the realm of fiction and fantasy is the vampire. However, despite the seemingly mythical nature of these immortal blood-drinking beings, there are instances that surface as purported encounters with these creatures, and one such account allegedly occurred in the tranquil English countryside. It is a tale that has become a curious part of local lore and a historic anomaly still discussed to this day. This is the untold story of the Crogland Grange vampire. In the idyllic countryside of Cumberland, northwest England, this tale began unfolding in 1875. It was that spring when two brothers, Edward and Michael Cranswell, along with their sister Amelia, ventured to this region and temporarily took up residence in a modest single-home stone farmhouse known as the Crogland Grange, overlooking the picturesque valley and nestled near an ancient churchyard. The property, owned by the Fisher family, seemed to draw the siblings in. Initially intending a brief stay, the Cranswells found themselves captivated by the serene rural life, swiftly becoming familiar faces among the locals. Their initial plans for a fleeting visit gradually dissipated as an inexplicable force seemed to compel them to linger. The townspeople, unaware of the undercurrents brewing beneath the surface, welcomed the siblings with open arms, oblivious to the veil that hid their true intentions. That sweltering summer, an ominous presence seemed to linger, casting a shadow over the quaint farmhouse. As the relentless heat wave persisted, Amelia found herself tossing and turning, growing more and more uncomfortable. With the shutters flung open in a desperate attempt to coax in a cooling breeze, she lay awake, her gaze fixated on the inky blackness that shrouded the trees beyond. It was then that something caught her eye, a faint flickering that danced among the branches, gradually intensifying as it drew nearer. 2 pinpricks of light weaved their way through the darkness, their approach sending a chill down Amelia's spine despite the stifling heat. A sense of foreboding gripped her, an inexplicable dread that she could not explain. As the eerie lights drew closer, Amelia felt the dread growing and enveloping her, a thick and palpable fear that gripped her very being. The source of the flickering illumination emerged from the shadows behind the window pane, revealing a grotesque visage, a hideous brown face with blazing eyes that leered menacingly at her. Its clawed hands began to scratch at the glass. Desperate to gain entry, though fortunately the window remained locked, Amelia found herself paralyzed, her voice trapped in her throat, unable to utter a sound as she trembled in silent terror, transfixed by the monstrous entity outside. As the creature's attempts to open the window escalated, from mere scratches to peeling away the lead that sealed the pane's edges, Amelia's mind raced with unspeakable horrors, unable to comprehend just who or what sought to breach her sanctuary. When the window pane shattered onto the floor, a bony, claw-like hand reached through, deftly unlocking the latch from within. Amelia's voice remained trapped, still paralyzed, as a towering, shadowy figure glided across the room. It seized her in its embrace, grasping her hair and forcibly yanking her head back, exposing her vulnerable throat. Despite her desperate attempts to move or cry out, she thus remained petrified, helpless against this monster. As the creature bent down, its teeth poised to pierce her flesh, the searing pain finally unleashed a piercing scream that echoed throughout the night. Jolted awake by their sister's terrified cries, Edward and Michael Cranswell sprang into action, rushing towards Amelia's room. With a forceful thrust, they broke down the door, only to witness a chilling sight. That shadowy figure swiftly escaping through the shattered window. Without hesitation, one of the brothers grabbed a fire poker and gave chase, determined to confront the intruder. However, the entity moved with an unnatural swiftness, its strides unnervingly long and inhuman, as it leapt over the ancient church wall, disappearing into the night's embrace. The brothers were left bewildered and unsettled. Amelia, shaken and bleeding from her neck, recounted the harrowing ordeal. Initially, she attributed the attack to a deranged individual, perhaps an escaped asylum patient. Her mind unable to comprehend the true nature of the assailant. The notion of a vampire, a creature of myth and legend, seemed too fantastical to consider. Deeply concerned for their sister's well-being, the Cranswell brothers decided to whisk Amelia away from the once peaceful, now terrifying confines of the Crogland Grange. A long vacation in Switzerland, they hoped, would provide her with the respite and recovery she desperately needed, allowing her to regain her strength and put the traumatic experience behind her. As they departed, an air of uncertainty lingered, a sense that the tranquil countryside harbored a sinister presence, a force that defied rational explanation. The events of that night had left more questions than answers in their wake. When they returned to Crogland Grange the following autumn, the memory of that traumatic night did not leave the family with time. The siblings were determined to confront any sinister force that remained. The brothers meticulously arranged their sleeping quarters directly across from Amelia's room, ensuring a watchful eye over her safety. Pistols were strategically placed within reach, just in case the creature did rear its head again. Amelia, still bearing the scars of the original attack, diligently secured her shutters each evening, fortifying her chambers. For a time, an eerie calm seemed to settle the countryside abode, lulling them into a false sense of security. The winter months passed without incident. However, as the first blossoms of spring unfurled, the familiar cold wind heralded the soon return of the creature. One evening, Amelia's slumber was once again disrupted by the hauntingly familiar sound, a scratching and tapping against her window. Now fortified with shutters to shield her from the horrific visage that lurked beyond. Bracing herself for the worst, yet clinging to the hope that it was merely an animal's doing, she mustered the courage to peer through the narrow gap at the top of the pane, left uncovered by the shutter's protective barrier. There, hunched menacingly at her window, was the same wretched creature she had encountered before, its shriveled, grotesque appearance and burning ember-like eyes glaring. This time, Amelia's voice did not fail her, and she screamed as loud as she could, a desperate cry that jolted her brothers into immediate action. They burst forth from the house, pistols loaded and ready. In a frantic pursuit, they allegedly managed to strike the creature in the leg as it fled, but its unnatural speed and agility allowed it to evade their grasp. Undeterred, it fled towards the nearby graveyard, disappearing into the depths of the ancient crypt again. The brothers knew that they couldn't face the creature alone. The previous night's encounter had shaken them to their core, and the realization that others in the area had experienced similar, harrowing visitations only added to the sense of unease that gripped them. Whispers of drained livestock and a young girl bearing inexplicable bite wounds spread like wildfire, fueling speculation that they were confronting a force beyond comprehension. The Cranswell brothers rallied the locals, imploring any able-bodied individuals to join their crusade. As the sun swept over the horizon, the small band of locals gathered, armed with an array of makeshift weapons, ready to confront the sinister creature that had plagued their once peaceful hamlet. Their footsteps echoing through the ancient graveyard as they approached the ominous crypt where the creature had sought refuge. The air hung heavy with a palpable sense of dread, as if the very stones themselves harbored secrets best left undisturbed. Yet, driven by a burning curiosity and a desire to restore tranquility to their community, they pressed on. As they neared the crypt's entrance, a hush fell over the group. The brothers exchanged a resolute glance, their grip tightening around their weapons as they prepared to venture into the abyss. As they crossed the threshold into the gloomy crypt, a chill ran down their spines. Their torchlight cast eerie shadows across the defiled graves, coffins torn asunder, their contents strewn haphazardly across the stone floor. A sense of unease gripped them. Yet amidst the desecrated resting places, one coffin remained untouched. With bated breath, they pried open the lid, and what greeted them was a sight that would forever be etched into their memories. There, lying motionless within the confines of the coffin, was the very creature that had terrorized them. Its features now dulled, as if trapped in a trance-like state. A fresh bullet wound marred its leg, a testament to the brothers' earlier pursuit, but it seemed to have little effect on the entity's unnatural existence. Realization dawned upon them, a chilling certainty that they were indeed confronting a vampire, a creature of myth and legend, now made flesh before their very eyes. The whisper and tales that had once seemed like mere folklore now took on a terrifying reality. The brothers knew that they could not allow this abomination to continue its reign of terror. Swiftly, they set about gathering the necessary materials, determined to purge the entity from their midst once and for all. The crackling flames cast a glow upon their faces as they prepared to consign the creature to the cleansing fire, a ritual that would hopefully bring an end to the harrowing ordeal. As the flames licked at the creature's form, the brothers and their companions watched with a mixture of trepidation and relief, knowing that they had vanquished a force that had threatened to unravel the very fabric of their existence. The smoke curled upwards, carrying with it the lingering remnants of a mystery that had once seemed unfathomable, yet had now been laid to rest, forever etched into the annals of local lore. This rather dramatic and sensational tale was initially recounted by the English travel writer and author Augustus Hare, who included it in his multi-volume 1890s autobiography, The Story of My Life, under the section titled The Beast of Crogland Grange. The narrative reads like a chilling horror story, and given that Hare was known for publishing ghost accounts during an era when sensationally macabre and gothic pulp stories, known as penny dreadfuls, were popular, one might assume it to be a work of fiction. However, Hare presented it as a completely real and factual account, without any indication that it was a fabrication. According to him, he had personally heard the story in 1874 directly from the actual owner of Crogland Grange, Captain Edward Fisher Rowe, whose family had owned the property for generations. However, Hare neglected to cite many names or detailed locations or provide verifiable sources, leaving the reader to ponder the veracity of the events described. Since Hare never admitted that any part of it was fictional and consistently presented it as fact, the account has become a perplexing mystery, sparking endless debates as to whether any element of it is rooted in truth, or if it was a product of either Hare's or Fisher's imagination. One of the earliest skeptics to scrutinize this published work was Charles George Harper, an English author and illustrator. Harper embarked on a personal quest to Cumberland in 1924, determined to get to the bottom of the alleged events at Crogland Grange. However, his investigation yielded perplexing results. As Harper delved into the heart of the local community, he encountered a startling revelation. Not a single resident had ever heard of a place called Crogland Grange, nor could they recall any whispers of its existence. It seemed as though this location had vanished into the mist of time, leaving no tangible trace behind. Undeterred, Harper scoured the countryside, seeking any semblance of the dwelling described in Hare's account. The closest he could uncover was a structure known as Crogland Low Hall, yet its characteristics diverged significantly from the haunting depiction. Not only was it situated over a mile from the nearest church, but it stood as a two-story edifice, defying the single-story description of the Grange. Moreover, the adjacent cemetery bore no evidence of the sinister crypt that had allegedly harbored the malevolent entity. Harper's quest to substantiate the existence of the Cranswell siblings proved equally fruitless. Despite his meticulous efforts, he could find no records or accounts that corroborated their presence in the region. Compounding this perplexity was the scarcity of clear information provided in Hare's narrative, rendering any attempt to trace their footsteps an exercise in futility. As Harper's investigation drew to a close, he found himself confronted with more questions than answers. The tale of the Crogland Grange vampire, once presented as an unvarnished account of a supernatural encounter, now stood as a tantalizing controversy, its origins and truthfulness lost to time. This cast significant doubt on the authenticity of the Crogland vampire tale, suggesting that it was either an intentional fabrication or an unintentional distortion of the truth. However, Harper's conclusions would face scrutiny in the 1930s when researcher F. Clive Ross embarked on his own investigation in Cumberland. Ross's findings painted a different picture, one that hinted at a kernel of truth buried beneath the layers of mystery. According to Ross's research, Crogland Low Hall was indeed the location Hare had described, though the property had since been demolished and a chapel erected in its place. Remarkably, remnants of the original structure remained, including the foundation stones of an ancient church and graveyard. The very same hallowed ground where the sinister entity was said to have taken refuge. Even more compelling was the discovery of a bricked-up window, rumored to be the very one through which the vampire had first appeared, tormenting the unsuspecting Amelia. Ross's findings injected a newfound sense of intrigue into the narrative, suggesting that beneath the sensationalized elements, there may have been a genuine encounter that sparked the tale's origins. The existence of the church and graveyard lent credence to the idea that something inexplicable had transpired in this secluded corner of the English countryside, an event so profound that it interlocked itself into local folklore, evolving and transforming with each retelling. Was it a mere fiction, born from the fertile imagination of a storyteller, or did it represent a distorted recounting of a genuine paranormal event, its details obscured by the passage of time? The answers remained elusive, and the tale would continue to captivate generations to come. However, further investigations shed new light on the narrative. It was discovered that others in the region had indeed heard the story, an old, mostly forgotten local myth, and the Fisher family was very much real. One local resident even revealed that Crogland Low Hall had once been referred to as Crogland Grange until 1720, suggesting that although Hare may have mixed up the dates, at least some elements of this tale held true. This aligned with the findings of a journalist, Lionel Fanthrope, who in recent years concluded that at Crogland Grange and a vault matching the one in the story had existed in the 1600s. While the full scope of events remained obscured, the possibility that an inexplicable encounter had indeed transpired in this secluded corner of the English countryside. The tale and origin of the Crogland Grange vampire remains uncertain, while the evidence neither confirms nor denies the events described. The lack of concrete proof poses a significant challenge for those seeking to validate the existence of a bloodthirsty creature of the night stalking the English countryside in the 1800s. It is highly plausible that this account originated from an unreliable secondhand source, perhaps Fisher himself, who may have fabricated the story, drawn inspiration from sensational Gothic literature of the era, or distorted factual elements beyond recognition. Alternatively, it could be the work of pure fiction crafted by Hare, skillfully weaving real locations into a narrative presented as truth for dramatic effect, only to be misconstrued as a potentially genuine encounter in later years, taking on a life of its own. Or perhaps it was merely a mischievous jest, a playful attempt to captivate and perplex. The truth remains elusive, leaving us to ponder the possibility that something inexplicable transpired in this secluded corner of Cumberland, transforming with each retelling and baffling those who dive deeper. Thank you all for watching this latest video. Certainly let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Also, please give this video a like, share it around, and subscribe. All these things help me out a ton. Please also follow me on X, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, and any other social media platform you may use. I'm probably there. Aside from that, guys, thank you again for allowing me to entertain you. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time. The oldest of native Hawaiian chants describe the Hawaiian Islands, the spirits that inhabit them, the forces of nature that shaped them, and all the living things upon them as inextricably connected, and perhaps the wisdom of the native peoples is true and not just folklore. When authorities are called to a residence for an incident, what they will see will shake them all to their core. A supposed entity with an insatiable hunger for blood and corpses makes its presence known. Are the infamous tales true? This is what we will discover as we dive into the untold story of the haunted Kasha House of Kaimuki, located in Hawaii. Beyond the waters of its beaches and the lush green canopies of its forests, the tropical paradise of the islands of Hawaii are an idyllic home or getaway for many. However, within the mists, shadows permeate, and where the veil is thin between our world and the next, those shadows sometimes whisper. In Japanese folklore, the creature known as the Kasha paints a terrifying picture. Its name translates to fire cart. It is a creature that is known to frequent populated areas, and where its diet consists of consuming the flesh of fresh human corpses. According to the lore, these creatures are a type of bakineko, or a type of hellcat that lives among human beings under the guise of a common house cat or a stray. They are bipedal and larger than most people. When they make themselves known, they are accompanied by the flames of hell, and strong thunderstorms are left in their wake. It is only during funerals that their true forms are revealed, and as a result, they are known to snatch the corpses of the freshly deceased and spirit them away to hell for punishment, a type of grim reaper, if you will. Akasha will animate a corpse as a puppet to do its bidding, and then will consume it as the ultimate punishment for one's misdeeds in life. Our story begins around 1940 on Oahu, in Hawaii, in a large house that stands at 8th and Harding in Kaimuki, its foundation resting atop 2 beds of lava rock. The original story that began the infamy of the Kaimuki house tells of a young couple who moved into the home, hoping for a good and beautiful life together. But almost as soon as they moved in, this shared dream would deteriorate. The neighbors began hearing loud bangs and crashes almost every night. And as the episodes grew in intensity, and suspecting that perhaps domestic violence could be taking place, one of the neighbors called the police. When the police arrived and questioned the couple, instead of seeing one or the other upset or abused, they told them something else instead. They began to divulge to the officers that they were being attacked by something that they couldn't see. What happened to the young couple following this particular night is unclear, but what is known is that they moved out a short while after the incident. Sometime later, on August 13th, 1942, on this day, an article would appear in the Honolulu Star Bulletin newspaper, one that described a bizarre happening that had just taken place. And this incident was supposedly caused by the evil doings of Kahuna. For further context, in ancient Hawaii, treatment of the sick was based on the belief that poor health was caused by malevolent spirits or disease-producing demons. Illness was considered the result of sorcery, or in some cases, the ramifications of one's actions. Among the Hawaiians, there existed a group, the Kahunas, or those who were keepers of the secret, whose wisdom had been gained by divine guidance. Kahunas were grouped into various categories, some good and others bad, and sorcery was practiced by the group. It was known as the Kahuna Ananai. So essentially, Kahuna is a form of witchcraft with both white and black magic. On the night the article referred to, police officers were called to a house by a woman during a strong thunderstorm. During the call, the lady kept repeating, "She's trying to kill my children," over and over again. Her words kept being interrupted by loud crashes of thunder and what sounded like items being destroyed in the background. Upon arriving and entering the house, the officers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Those present began to witness something that was truly horrific. The woman who had initially called was screaming in the corner of the main room as her 3 children were levitating before her and everyone. Upon approaching them, the officers, as well as the children, would be slapped, pushed, and hurled across the room by a sinister, invisible force. The children were a brother and 2 sisters, ages 10, 18, and 20. The main officer in charge was a police sergeant. Prior to the call, the family began to smell a very strange odor, like that of sulfur permeating their home, and then the physical attacks began. As the force attacked those involved, the mother of the family ran into her room and returned with several items. She frantically began fanning tea leaves and began throwing salt towards the entity. After several minutes, her efforts seemed to work, as the children and the officer were released from the clutches of whatever this thing was. The family and the officer would vacate the premise following this night of horror. The woman who had called the authorities believed that the happenings were a result of black magic that had been placed on her by her ex-husband, whom she had recently left. This is no doubt probably the most famous story surrounding the Kaimuki house, given the press it received in the various media outlets, but it certainly would not be the last. 30 years later, another incident would too garner the attention of the people. Another frantic late-night call had dispatched a patrol car in Kaimuki. The girls who lived there had supposedly heard strange noises of someone moving around and talking inside of their house. At first, thinking someone had broken into their home, they phoned the authorities. But following the call, the noises began to escalate in intensity. Then, one of the women felt the ice-cold grasp of a hand on her arm. The girls, all three, ran out of the home and sat in their car until the officer arrived. Upon hearing their story, he would go inside and check the home for an intruder, but would find no one. Deciding to spend the rest of the night with one of the girls' mothers, they asked the policeman to follow them to the mother's home to ensure their safety. As the girls drove in front of the officer, they began to erratically swerve from side to side, ultimately pulling into a vacant parking lot. Upon approaching the vehicle with concern, the policeman later wrote this in his report. As I approached the vehicle, I could see two of the girls screaming. The girl sat in the middle, in the back, was fighting a person that could not be seen. She was very clearly being strangled. I opened one of the back doors and reached into the vehicle, and to my shock, a big, strong, calloused hand that could not have possibly been that of a teenage girl grabbed my arm and twisted it. Upon freeing myself, I called for backup. The answering officer was certainly prepared for a parking lot fight, but not one with a ghost. Within minutes, the other officer would arrive, and with all the color drained out of his face, the original responding officer told him that there was a ghost in that car. By this point, all women involved had exited the car and were hysterical, crying and screaming. Continuing to quote the officer's report, I told the girl who had been choked to get in my patrol car and the other two women to ride with my fellow officer. But as soon as the young lady sat in my vehicle, which had stayed running during the incident, the motor died. It died and wouldn't start up again. Placing the girls back into their original car, the officer tried to start the vehicle again, and it started as if nothing had ever been wrong. Wanting to get these frightened girls home safe, the original officer and the responding officer agreed to continue to follow them, but upon pulling out of the parking lot, and almost as soon as they had driven about 5 yards, suddenly, one of the girls' vehicle's doors flew open, and the same girl who had previously been attacked was thrown out of the vehicle. Upon rushing to her position to check on her, she was again tearing at her throat and making noises as if she was being strangled. She had also incurred some road rash. Together, the two policemen were not strong enough to pull her hands away. Terrified and believing the matter to be a spiritual one of the officers ran into the nearby Oasis Cafe and came back with a handful of salt and a glass of water, which was spritzed upon everyone there. And as the drops touched the young woman, she finally was able to catch her breath again. In later interviews, the officer would tell the press that his grandmother had told him that this was a method to make ghosts go away, and perhaps his grandmother was right. Given the time frame in which these stories occurred, most involved may no longer be with us, so corroborating details is nearly impossible. But these tales have certainly made the Kaimuki house infamous. Now, there are several possible explanations as to why and how the home became haunted by whatever paranormal entity or entities. Again, details are scarce, but I've done my best to research and put together the most cohesive theories possible. The first theory refers to a father who, after his wife told him that she was going to leave him, decided to do the unthinkable and end the lives of his two children and his wife that still resided in the home. The wife and son's bodies were buried in the backyard, but the corpse of the daughter was never found. The second theory is that of a strange love triangle. A man was dating a woman who was dating another woman in secret without the man knowing. And upon his discovery of his girlfriend's secret affair, he decided to take the lives of her girlfriend, and ultimately himself within the walls of the Kaimuki house. The original house, from what I could gather, has since been demolished and another home built atop where it once stood. And one of the many questions I have is this home haunted just as the original home was? Was the haunting, if it existed at all, the result of vengeful spirits of those who had met their demise there? The result of a bloodthirsty entity known as the Kasha, who would do anything to feed upon the flesh of the freshly deceased? Or was it something else? Was it perhaps the result of native Hawaiian black magic being practiced on the premises or nearby? Or someone cursing another using this magic? We may never truly have the answers to these probing questions. But one thing is for certain. There was once a place that harbored darkness, a black void that existed in the heart of paradise, the supposed home of the angry souls of the dead, and possibly a creature from a world that is not our own. So if you see something that's beautiful on the surface, just know that one must be cautious, because something evil could be lurking just beyond the shadows. Thank you guys so much for watching this new video. Hawaii is such a beautiful and cool place, full of culture and history and folklore, and I thought it was time to pay some respect and cover a story that originates from one of the islands. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, leave me a comment, and share this video around as much as you can. All that stuff truly, and I can't say this enough, helps me out tremendously. Not to sound like a broken record. There are many episodes to come, including one I've been working on for a few months now that I'm really excited to share with you guys. And as a message to my newer subscribers, I do have over 100 past videos that you can check out if you enjoyed this one and want to dive into another paranormal mystery. And other than that, guys, I appreciate each and every one of you. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. Along a section of winding road, tall rustic gates harbor dark secrets. Not an adventure for the weak. This place is known for an abundance of evil activity. As the weary wander through the rusted iron bars, the souls of the damned whisper. Some will visit with wonder, and others apprehension, and for good reason, for this place has spawned many legends. Stories of satanic cults, sacrifices, demonic possession, and a wide range of terrifying apparitions have allegedly revealed themselves. But are there any truth to the rumors? What are these bone-chilling stories? What is it about this stretch of road in Thornton, Colorado that has made it so infamous? That is what we will discover here on this episode of Mystery Archives as we explore the gates of hell of Riverdale Road of Colorado. All information provided is purely speculative. I've tried my best to find any and all information I could to the best to fit the stories, and or see possibly where they could have come from, or if there's any truth to them. Riverdale Road, an 11-mile path located between Thornton and Brighton, Colorado, has been a supposed hotspot for paranormal activity for decades. The earliest rumors tell us of a nearby Native American burial ground. When it was in use, it said that the tribe placed a curse upon the land to affect those who would disturb their dead. And as we've heard numerous times before, you don't mess with native burial grounds. Nothing good ever comes of it. More on this later. Over the years, strange entities, those seeming to be half human and half animal, have been known to permeate the path ahead. Could these creatures have been the very feared skinwalkers of native folklore? Not all is evil with this rumor, however. There are both good and evil forces at work. They say that if you see a gray fox along the road, then a benevolent entity has graced your trip. But if a coyote is what you see instead of a gray fox, the path ahead is an ominous and malevolent one. We will certainly dive back into all of these rumors later, but the lore doesn't end here. It was nicknamed closer to modern times for a variety of stories over the decades, and those of which I'll cover now, in no particular order. Many people were lynched upon the trees surrounding the road, and many as sacrifices, some allegedly of former slaves by racist groups, and others sacrifices committed by residents of the local community long ago. Whether the groups were one and the same cannot be distinguished. The gates of hell was once supposedly the home of a commune of Satanists. Satanists who would do anything to keep their black church and its practices a secret. If anyone questioned the leadership, or if an outsider got too close to the truth, they would simply go missing. On the north end of the road, not too far from Highway 7, there once stood a large house, probably what most would consider to be a mansion. But the ruins of this building, too, harbor sinister secrets. Built by a very wealthy man for him and his family, the home was once quite the marvel to gaze upon, but the ability to look upon the structure would be short-lived. Shortly after moving his family in, once construction was finished, the man began to change, growing colder, more distant, and stranger. Located back behind the home was an underground cellar, and taking the blood from the lives of those who had gone astray. It is here that they say he used black magic, writing strange symbols on the walls with their blood in order to try and conjure spirits and demons, perhaps in order to gain power and wealth. Behind the cellar is an old burnt tree, which has some lore of its own as well. This was where some victims were supposedly hung and burned at the stake, leaving charred remnants. One fateful night, as his family slept, the husband of the family crept up the stairs with an axe, and without the others knowing, he went room to room, slaying his wife and his children as their blood coated the floors of the house. This diabolical man, seemingly demon-possessed, then took fuel and dumped it all throughout the house, lit it aflame, and then stepped outside to revel in pure madness at what he had just done. Was it him or a demon inside of him? This we'll perhaps never know, but he apparently, once the home was partially engulfed in flames, then took a rope, fastened it to the charred tree behind his cellar, and ultimately hung himself, his feet dangling inches above the ground, as the home behind him was reduced to burnt rubble. Other versions of the story say the man disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. A pale white figure of a woman is said to haunt the grounds now. It can be heard screaming some nights when the wind is still. Those that visit the Gates of Hell area have reported, as previously mentioned, seeing strange animals, but they also report seeing and hearing stranger things as well. Disembodied voices, the feeling of being watched, and the sensation of icy hands poking and touching them. Another very strange phenomenon that's said to exist is bloody human handprints materializing on the street signs with no rational origin. This place, like many, seems downright terrifying in my opinion. But is there any truth to any of these stories? Or are they just that, stories? Well, here's what I found, following what we covered in order. Thornton, Colorado was indigenously inhabited by several Native American tribes, most notably the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. Each tribe had very different burial methods. The Arapaho usually buried their deceased on the same day that the person had died. The body was dressed in their finest traditional clothing, and a spacious grave was dug into the ground. The person was then buried with some of their personal belongings, such as clothing and blankets. Stones and other items would be placed on top of the grave to mark its significance and who was buried there. Arguably, fairly similar to how the West buries people today. The Cheyenne, however, had a very different method. It's unclear how long it took them to typically lay someone to rest, but their funeral customs were that they would wrap the deceased in shawls and blankets. They would proceed to the designated burial ground, and during the procession, a bloodletting practice would take place, where ponies would typically be killed. They are interesting to me in numerous ways, but they wouldn't bury their dead. They would instead build a scaffold of sort and lay the dead on top of it. This was done in the belief that it would accelerate the soul of the departed's passage into the afterlife. For practical reasons, it is believed that they did this in order to prevent wild animals from pillaging the corpse, which very well may have been the case, but typically the bodies would stay and sometimes decay and eventually fall back down to the ground. Now, curses did exist for both tribes, but I couldn't find any that specifically referenced burial sites. In almost all people's beliefs, disturbing the dead is considered very taboo. Could it perhaps be our collective regard for the eternal rest of those who have passed that have led us to the belief that a burial ground could indeed be cursed? Also, skinwalkers, which are still feared to this day, were created when a person committed a heinous act, like the killing of a family member. and this would grant them supernatural powers, allowing them to shapeshift from a human to an animal at will. They often become coyotes, wolves, foxes, or bears, though they can transition into any animal. Both coyotes and foxes are allegedly the omens along the road containing the gates of hell. When it comes to the supposed lynchings that took place, I found this. In Colorado, it was a cheap way to execute criminals, and the majority of those that are documented, roughly 175 cases, were mostly the results of court rulings at the time all over the state, and the time being the early 20th century. As far as if formal slaves were lynched, this very possibly could have taken place, but I couldn't find any that were directly linked to Thornton. In total, there were 5 events that were explicitly tied to race, but many took place, again, in the early 20th century, albeit as horrific as they were. After 1919, lynch mobs occasionally flared up to dole out public justice. But as more people moved to the state, attitudes towards this type of behavior and action began to change. Therefore, public opinion, as well as opinion of the courts, moved away from this method of execution. When it comes to the apparent satanic cult commune that supposedly lived there, I couldn't find any evidence of them no matter where I looked. But obviously, if I was a secret cult and I was good at my job, I wouldn't have any evidence of my bloodthirsty existence on the internet either. This now leads us back to the mansion where the name came from. The name Gates of Hell came from the old and rusted iron gates of a burned-down mansion, a blaze that was the result of a madman who took his family out. Now, there is proof of the mansion, who bought it, and what happened that caused it to burn down, but the truth is certainly less spooky than the legend. Before I dive into it, I wanted to also mention that it's more than likely that the charred tree was the result of either the original fire or of a lightning strike taking place. The mansion was originally named the Volpert House. Built in 1864 by a man named David Volpert, this 2-story brick house was a fine structure of dignity. David, who was a very successful prospector, along with his wife Catherine, had 2 daughters and a son. However, even though fitting the time frame when the madman's story supposedly took place, David didn't go crazy and harm his family. He actually would go on to pass away, presumably within the home, at the age of 75. What happened to his family members is unclear, but they most likely moved on and passed away from natural causes. The home, as far as I can tell, sat vacant from the early 1900s until 1975. This is when a man named Dr. Hugo Rodick and his wife, Orion Sally Rodick, purchased the home, working hard on behalf of the Adams County Historical Society. The couple would go on to restore the home and live there for a short time, designating its status as a historical monument. Things seemed normal for the Rodicks until 1 a.m. on November 28th, 1975. The home, which stood at 9190 Riverdale Road, became engulfed in flames. It's unclear whether or not the couple had any children or any that lived with them at that time, but the Rodicks would make it out of the blaze very much alive. And although the origin of the blaze was undetermined, the authorities at the time did determine that arson did not seem to be at play. Dr. Rodick would go on to live and ultimately passed away at the age of 102. It seems as though the Madman Mansion story, as I've come to see it, could possibly be a fictionalized amalgamation of both of the real stories surrounding the Volpert house. The ruins of the home, as well as the original gates, have since been demolished, and the Pelican Pond's open space now sits in their place. Sometimes the truth isn't as fun as the legends that surround an area, and perhaps there could be more truth in some of these tales. Perhaps the area itself is where the veil is thinner between our world and the next. It's hard to say, but one thing is certain. The folklore of America is vast, creative, and entertaining. And it's incredible to see so many stories spawning from seemingly such an insignificant place, like a winding stretch of road in the middle of Colorado. But what do you think? Do you have any stories about the gates of hell? Do you have any stories from your local community that have become legends? Make sure to let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it around, and subscribe. All these things help me out a ton. I did just want to say thank you guys for having my back as a community. I'm really thankful to have such an awesome group of people not only enjoying my work, but also enjoying interacting and supporting one another. Please don't change. Anyways, guys, please follow me on X, Facebook, and I'm sure I'm on any and all other social platforms that you're on. Spotify as well. I have all my episodes there too. And with that, guys, anyways, love y'all. Thank you for allowing me to do what I do. And this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time. I've covered dozens of hauntings and paranormal happenings on this channel, some famous, some infamous, and others less known. But what I think is important as well is to help use my platform to share other people's stories of their experiences with the supernatural, to show that these experiences are indeed real and that they do truly happen. These are subscriber submitted stories, and all I ask is that you keep an open mind. These are your paranormal encounters. When I was in junior high, me and my best friend at the time played with a new Ouija board that she had got for Christmas. We messed around for a while, but nothing happened, so we got bored and put it away. A few weeks later, I was at her house again and was playing around with the record feature and my flip phone. My friend left to use the bathroom, and I kept messing around with the phone. It was just me and her cat alone in the basement. I made a recording of me and the cat meowing at each other. Innocent kid stuff. But when I played it back, there was this really deep, animalistic grunting sound in the recording that was definitely not there when I was initially making it. It also was way too deep sounding to possibly be from a 14-year-old girl or a little cat. It was a few years later before anything else happened. Next, I was around 16 to 17 years old, and we moved in with my mom's boyfriend. My room always felt dark and uncomfortable, like I was always being watched even when I was alone. After a while, weird things started to happen. Things would go missing, then later reappear in the middle of my desk or someplace obvious. I would hear tapping and scratching on the walls in my room when everyone was asleep. I would get horrible nightmares, not like anything I'd ever experienced before. One time, I got a scratch across my leg while I was sitting in my bed. I looked around but could not find anything sharp that could have done it. Last was the bed shaking. Every night, along the wall scratching, creepy feeling, and nightmares, my bed would shake. Not hard, but just enough to make me notice. No heavy traffic or trains nearby, and there was no construction going on. It happened in my room only. I would sleep with my mom or my sister after a while because I couldn't handle it anymore. One time, my mom got curious and slept in my bed to see what the big deal was, and it shook her too. A few years later, we all moved out. I moved in with my future husband, and we rented the basement at his childhood home for a couple years. While there, 3 weird things happened, and it was the first time I ever saw anything. The first was this big black dog that just appeared in our living room. I blinked, and it vanished. The second was in the kitchen. I was cooking dinner when I glanced to the side and saw a tall man with curly hair and a ball cap. When I told my husband the description, I remembered more of the description back in the day. It's been 10 years since this happened. He told me I just described his older brother. Sadly, his older brother lost his fight with depression long before I ever met my husband, and he actually passed away in the same basement we were living in. The last thing that happened, I think, was either his brother again or an energy imprint. I was in the kitchen again and asking my husband what he wanted for dinner, and he replied something unhelpful along the lines of, "Whatever you want." Well, a few minutes later, I get a call from my husband. He wasn't even home at the time of that conversation. Who was I talking to? I would like to let you know that I do not have any mental illness or neurological issues that would make me hallucinate. I never drank or did drugs. We also had a brand new carbon monoxide detector installed when we had moved in, so there would be no reason for me to hallucinate any of that. My last experience is in my current home, and it happened a few years ago. I was pouring some ramen noodles into bowls for my kids' lunch when the bowls started to spin in different directions without me touching them. I stopped and then stepped back, and they stopped spinning, then spun one more time before finally stopping altogether. There are more minor experiences I've had, but these were the most memorable. I hope it was interesting enough for what you were looking for. I certainly think it was. You certainly had a variety of paranormal experiences from the sounds of it, but the nightmares, the scratching on the walls, and the shaking of my bed would have been downright terrifying. What really takes the cake for me is the fact that you had a conversation with something pretending to be your husband, and your husband wasn't even there. All around, thank you for sharing this with us, Gail. Hello, big fan and submitting my story. I've always had an interest in the paranormal my entire life, but was never really convinced up until this event. It was spring of 2015, and I was working on a conservation crew in Lake Tahoe, doing fire hazard removal and fuels reduction with the Forest Service on a chainsaw crew. I had been doing this job for a year in Nevada, and this was my first time in the area. Our workday came to a close, and mind you, this is the day one of our schedule out of a 6-day work week, and we left Incline Village towards our designated campsite at Spooner Lake in Carson City. After our crew set up camp and ate dinner, myself and 2 other co-workers took a brief walk down the service trail until we got to an intersection on the trail that wasn't surrounded by trees. We shoot the breeze and smoke American spirits for about 45 minutes to an hour, laughing and just talking about life, when out of nowhere, in the corner of my left eye, I see a white mist and the silhouette of a person, about 6 feet tall, just glide diagonally from behind a tree. It stands motionless in the middle of the trail we're on, and I can see the dirt of the trail underneath it because it had no feet, but its legs conjoined just after its knees. I couldn't see through it because it was so dense from whatever it was made out of. I whispered my coworker's name to get them to look up from their phone, and as he looks up, he says, "What?" And then he too became frozen as he stared right at this figure. I ask him if he sees it too, and he says, "I think it pierced my soul." While my other coworker is oblivious to all of this happening, it suddenly notices us noticing it and glides slowly, diagonally, across the trail and behind a tree, was gone. The angle in which it moved seemed as though it was a direction or path that we cannot conceive. Anyway, we run back to our campground, which was about 100 to 200 yards away, and just went back to our tents without saying a word to each other or the rest of the crew. The real amazing part about this experience was that, unbeknownst to me or anyone in my crew, is that next to the lake are these hills that gradually go up, and every morning this fog would roll down these hills, and it just looks incredible. However, it is the exact same density and material that the figures seem to be composed of. I think the spirit is somehow part of nature, and maybe burning tobacco brought it out, as if it were an offering. After all, this is an ancient land. That was my experience. I hope you enjoyed it. I did enjoy it, Nick. It sounds super creepy, though, in my opinion. And perhaps you're right. Maybe the offering brought forth some type of ancient spirit that dwells the area. Translucent and or composed of fog just sounds so eerie to me. Thank you for sharing this with us. This must have happened in 1986 or 87, which made me about 6 or 7 at the time. It is important to note that where we were staying back then, a suburb and then Pretoria, currently referred to as the city of Tshwane, a large city even then. Our house was situated only a few blocks from one of the busiest streets in the city, a broad 4-lane with constant traffic both ways, big trucks right through the night barreling off into the distance. The kind of consistent drone I imagine a New Yorker living in Manhattan might experience, even in the dead of night. On this particular night, my mother was alone in the living room with our faithful family golden spaniel, watching some late-night TV. Myself and my younger sister were both already sound asleep. My elder brother was keeping to himself in his bedroom. My father was not in the picture at the time. A perfectly serene scene. It must have been about 10 p.m., a warm summer evening, and our living room front door was open to allow the pleasant evening air inside. The first thing my mom noticed was a feeling of unease. The feeling was intense and unignorable. She got up and crossed the living room to the outside porch, the dog following behind her. According to her account, this is when things got super weird. Upon exiting the house, she immediately noticed an eerie silence hanging over the place. It was as if some huge vacuum cleaner had just gone and sucked every bit of ambient noise out of the air. No crickets chirping, of which there should be many in high summer. Not a breath of air. No dog barking in the distance. And most disturbing of all, not even the faintest whisper of traffic anywhere, near or far. Furthermore, the air had acquired a distinct dull quality. A feeling almost like your ears needed to pop. Almost thickened, denser, making it somehow harder to draw a breath. Just when you think it couldn't get weirder, the dog who was standing close by broke into a long, drawn-out, sorrowful howl, seeming filled with immeasurable anguish. This was not her habit and was highly unusual. She had never before exhibited such behavior, and never again did afterwards. It must have been around this time, from all that I can glean, that my brother, having fallen asleep on his bed, was woken up, not by the dog's howling, but from feeling cold. This was slightly unusual this time of year. I believe it might have even been the dog that woke him after all, yet he only remembers waking up from the cold feeling that he had. He was around 11 or 12 years old back then. He surely must have sensed something amiss as well, for his immediate instinct was not to cover himself in order to escape the cold. Instead, he opted to get up and go investigate, upon which he met my mom in the passage, going in the opposite direction. Not a word was exchanged between them, my mom continuing on to her room, and my brother, still somewhat befuddled, continued to the living room and out onto the porch, still with no clear directive. I think this was when the dog started howling again, having moved to the center of the narrow front lawn that we had. Now my mom has returned, having fetched her Bible from the bedside table, standing resolutely next to my brother. Though I confess to placing no great stock in the Bible itself as a tool of any great power, and am no supporter of the concept of religion, neither is my mom anymore, and maybe it was my mother's sheer power of faith, which is considerable. In any event, these are the facts as it occurred. My mom wasted no time opening the Bible, randomly and earnestly, starting a heartfelt prayer. The exact nature of her prayer is altogether irrelevant, save for her deep-rooted faith in its effectiveness. The effect was immediate and dramatic. At once, all ambient sound and natural warmer air came back in a rush. It was almost an audible, tangible whooshing sound. The dog stopped howling. She approached the humans now, tail wagging and panting, totally back to normal, except that she couldn't hide her obvious relief. This marked the end of the episode. As to the origins thereof, we have speculated over the years, but are careful to not make any definitive accusations towards anyone. The person who was approached with a warning to lay off, still to this dying day, denied all knowledge of being involved. However, on one thing, we are all unanimous. Foul play was involved, an ancient form of the blackest arts. Genevieve, thank you as well for sharing your story with us. It seems like whatever this thing was caused everything to be still, almost like some kind of time warp, which sounds very creepy indeed. I'm glad that your mother found whatever authority it was that she needed to send this thing away and allow everything to get back to normal for you guys. First, I'd like to say that I appreciate all of you guys that did allow me to retell your stories. I appreciate you having the courage to submit them as well, because not a lot of people do. And overall, I hope I did your experiences justice. If you would like to submit a story for the next episode, because I would like to make this a regular thing if it's possible, please email me at mysteryarchives@gmail.com. Please like the video if you liked it, leave me a comment, subscribe with notifications, and share this around. Other than that, guys, like I've said, these experiences are very real, and they do occur a lot more often than people would like to think. Anyways, guys, I love you all. Thank you for being an amazing and supportive community. And as always, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time. A reality to some, the thought of spending an isolated period of time during a turbulent series of storms inside a lighthouse would be a strange and seemingly scary predicament to be in. The waves crashing against walls, rain and hail pelting the windows, and the roll of thunder surrounding you, not knowing when and if the weather will yield. Certainly, it would take a mental toll on a person. It seems that some would break under these conditions, and others wouldn't. And those that broke, perhaps would never leave. Such a place we're discussing today is the Seguin Island Lighthouse, located in Maine. And this haunted Maine lighthouse holds dark and chilling secrets. The Seguin Island Lighthouse is Maine's second oldest lighthouse. The explorer Samuel D. Champlain discovered Seguin Island in 1612. He commented that it looked like a giant tortoise. The name Seguin is said by some to be a corruption of a Native American word that means place where the sea vomits. Others claim that it originates from a Native American word meaning hump. Either way, it's entirely appropriate given how it looks. In June of 1786, 55 local merchants petitioned the General Court of Massachusetts for a lighthouse on Seguin Island. The petition noted that the island of Seguin seems to be designated by nature for this purpose, and it stated the opinion that if there was a light upon this island, many vessels would be saved from shipwreck and many persons preserved from immature deaths. At that time, there were only 3 light stations on the coast north of Boston: at Thatcher Island off Cape Ann, at Portsmouth Harbor in New Hampshire, and at Portland Head in Maine. It would take nearly a decade, but the lighthouse would be approved by then President George Washington. By April 1795, a site had been chosen, and a request was posted in local newspapers for proposals to build an octagonal wooden lighthouse tower on a stone foundation and a 1-story wood-frame dwelling. A newspaper notice in late October of 1796 announced that the buildings had been completed under the supervision of Henry Dearborn, who would later become the customs collector in Boston and Secretary of War under President Jefferson. Seguin's first keeper, appointed in March of 1796 at $200 per year, was Major John Polaricki, a Hungarian hussar and a count who was born in France and fought with French troops during the American Revolution. His family had been Hungarian nobility, and they dated back as far as 1613. He had settled in Dresden, Maine, and was their town clerk for 25 years until he applied for and was granted a position as the keeper of Seguin Island Light in 1898. His meager salary was unfit for living off the island in such harsh conditions due to its remote, exposed location, and he constantly requested increases in his salary, but was always denied. His brother-in-law, Christopher Pushard, served as his assistant with him, and initially brought his wife briefly to the island, where they had their first child, Jane. However, Pushard didn't get his family to stay, as relations were strained between the two men. After serving for 8 years, in 1804, John died penniless on the island. For years afterward, some say his ghost has haunted the keepers who came after him. Known as the Old Captain, John's ghost would become all too familiar to some. One incident, closer to modern times, occurred after the lighthouse was automated in 1985. The supervisor in charge of the crew to move the furniture reported months later that he was woken up by a ghost. He claimed that several times as he slept inside the lighthouse, as rain hammered the structure, his bed began to ferociously shake. Waking up in a panic, he sees at the foot of his bed an older man, dressed in oilskins, grabbing and shaking the bed near his feet. The entity asked him not to take the furniture away and to leave his home alone. Convinced he was simply in a deep dream, the supervisor decided not to oblige the captain's ghost. The following day, he decided to move the furniture anyways, as he and his crew had been paid to complete it. That day, all the furniture had been successfully loaded onto a boat, which was being lowered into the water. But as it lowered, suddenly, the cable mysteriously snapped. The ship and all of its contents fell and would spill onto the rocks below, smashing everything into pieces. In the years since, many responsible and credible volunteer caretakers who have signed on to help upkeep the lighthouse, along with the occasional tourists, have reported various sightings of multiple entities, as well as experiencing paranormal events. Items have been moved inside the house or tossed from shelves and onto the floor. Mysterious cold spots seem to appear at random. Tools would often disappear, as if someone or something was playing a trick on people. And doors have been observed opening and closing. Oddly, when the caretakers move the furniture, it is sometimes restored to its original spot the following day, as if something invisible had moved it all back. Some have reported hearing coughing from an unseen force, as well as whispers and the sighting of an older man dressed in oilskins. The old captain isn't the only entity that seemingly dwells the grounds of the Seguin Lighthouse. This following story is one of legend and has been very difficult to find documentation, but it is perhaps the most tragic incident that has ever occurred on the island. According to the legend, around the mid-1800s, a caretaker or keeper of the beacon, newly married, brought his young wife out with him to tend to the light. Not used to the isolation of the island, his wife quickly became increasingly bored and depressed, constantly complaining about not having anything to do. Thinking it would occupy her and keep her mind off the boredom, her husband ordered a piano and asked it to be brought to the island just before winter would set in. Upon its delivery, he proudly presented it to her after numerous attempts to get the piano up the side of the rocky ledge. Once it was up, it was carefully hauled into the keeper's house with the hands of many friends. His wife was delighted, but she couldn't play without sheet music. Fortunately, though, only one song had come with the piano. It was a simple Scott Joplin tune. Soon afterward, when winter had set in, the island was frozen. No other deliveries, despite their best efforts, could come in. Isolated more than ever, together, the man's wife would continually play her piano, playing the same song over and over and over again. The isolation and constant playing of the same tune over countless hours and days began to take their toll. The husband of the couple began to lose his sanity. Finally, reaching his breaking point, he had had enough. He took an axe and, with a fit of fury, chopped the piano into pieces. Following the outburst, once the shock had subsided, his wife bitterly complained. He would then turn on and attack her, gruesomely chopping her with the axe. Within hours, it seemed that the man had finally come back to his senses, but realizing the horrendous act he had committed, he decided to turn the axe on himself. Today, some say that on the Kennebec River, during foggy nights, you can hear the ghost of the lighthouse keeper's wife playing the same ghostly tune on her phantom piano out over the waves on those still, calm evenings. Many mariners and former keepers have claimed to have heard some kind of piano tune playing over the waters as well. These three ghosts have been claimed to have been seen or their presence felt by numerous visitors and volunteers over the decades. Among other entities, some of which I was unable to find origin information on, is the one of a young girl. And her story goes like this. Moving onto the island with her family in the early 1900s, as her father took the position as a keeper at the lighthouse, she was the only child of her two parents. The island is isolated, lonely, and cold. There are no other children to play with, or much to do for a young child to stay entertained. One of the activities she tried to preoccupy herself with was throwing rocks down into the water from the cliffside near the lighthouse. One unfortunate day, as the rocks near the edge were slippery from the mist of the fog surrounding the island, the poor young lady would slip and meet her demise, falling onto the rocks and waters below. It is said that she still lingers on the island and does everything she can to entertain herself and interact with those who happen to visit her forever home. She has been witnessed by many running playfully around the gardens, laughing and smiling, playing hide and seek with visitors for all eternity. She's been seen not only by visitors to Seguin Island, but also by previous keepers who called the lighthouse their home. She's been witnessed running up and down the stairs of the lighthouse, waving to her onlookers, tapping people's backs, only to have them turn around to catch a fleeting glimpse of her small feet running away and phasing out of her vision. There are a few things I would like to mention before we go. Considering the location, I wonder if the lighthouse or the island is indeed haunted. Could it have perhaps started with the misfortunes of the late captain? Or was it something else? Perhaps a battle of sorts, or a tragedy occurred there, or near there, tainting the land. It's hard to say, but with the age of the lighthouse, and given what we know about its history, I wouldn't be surprised if spirits still dwell there. Maybe it is a beacon for souls, as much as it is for ships. And this isn't a sponsorship, but I wanted to provide the following details because I think it's very important to fund and preserve history whenever possible. Seguin Island is a little over 2 miles offshore from the mouth of the Kennebec River, near Fort Popham and Popham Beach State Park. The lighthouse grounds and museum are open to the public, and lighthouse tours are provided during the summer. The Fish and Trips boat, also called the Seguin Island Ferry, provides daily 30-minute services during the summer season to ferry people to the island. And for those who want to try and investigate the lighthouse, there are overnight rustic accommodations available for members of the Friends of Seguin Island. You can contact the Friends of Seguin Island at seguinisland.org. I would encourage all of you to go and experience places for yourselves whenever possible, especially historic places, to help preserve them for future generations. But I will warn you, be careful and be respectful, because if you aren't either, you might just become the newest permanent resident of the isolated island. Thank you all so much for watching this newest episode While I investigate cases for other videos, sometimes it's fun for me to go and check out more historic places and learn about the stories surrounding them. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe with notifications on, leave me a comment, and share this around on any and all social media platforms or with your friends and family. All that stuff genuinely helps me out tremendously, especially when YouTube doesn't seem to like our content as much these days. There will be a new and terrifying case for an episode coming out very soon. And I did want to thank you guys, as always, for supporting me. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time.